Welcome to another analysis session with me, Simon Williams, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a win. Woohoo! For a change. So I've looked at a lot of my losses against David Howe, Hawkins. I looked at a draw, I think, as well. And now I'm going to take a look at a win. I do occasionally win the odd game of chess, very, very occasionally nowadays, and hopefully I can improve on that in the future. And this was probably one of my most exciting wins, and it was the first time I've ever played the Caro Kann in my life. Even in a blitz game, I've never played the Caro Kann. Obviously, I'm so scared of the hillbilly, but don't tell anyone that. But anyway, I thought I'd give it a go in this game, and it's a very interesting game, bit more of a tactical game, so we'll dive into the action very soon. But first of all, let's just mention my opponent. Now, my opponent is Heather Richards, and Heather hasn't really played chess for the last 6 years. She was originally from England, and then she got married and moved to Australia. So you can't really get further away from England than Australia. But she now lives in the backwaters of Australia, apparently, and she's passed her engineer degree, and she hasn't played for ages. So this is, one of her first tournaments for a long time, and she's just trying to get back into the swing of things. Now, Heather was a good friend from the old days, and we used to, hang around together with lots of other chess players, and she's a really nice person, lovely person, and she used to live in Norway, she's lived in Australia and England, very interesting girl. And the strange thing was, in the last 6 years I haven't seen her, and I went to sit at the board, and she hasn't aged one day. So whatever's going on in Australia is amazing. In the last 6 years I've probably aged about 20 years, but Heather looks exactly the same, so she's doing something right. And I'll just get a quick picture up of Heather now so you can see who I'm playing. And there she is, probably on a beach in Australia. And so let's now move on to the game. And Heather is, let me get this right, I believe a woman IM, and she's been about 2200 rating before, so she's a very tactical player, so I was expecting an exciting game. So let's move over to the action. So I start with the Caro Kann, and I played this because I was expecting this move, the fantasy variation. And now this is a very dangerous line against the Caro Kann, this f3 move. And a lot of players here continue pawn takes e4, pawn takes e4, and now e5. And this is the kind of thing that white wants here. Now the threat here is queen to h4 check, so white has to watch out for that. But after knight to f3, and now something like pawn takes d4, bishop to c4, white gets a very strong and dangerous attack. And this is something I don't want to let my opponent, have all the fun. For example, f7 is a major target with castling, the f-file, and this is maybe okay for black, but you have to put up with a bit of defensive measures. So this f3 move, the fantasy variation, is a move I've also played with white myself, and it's very interesting. Now there are a couple of moves here, but I prepared a line that Jabava plays with queen to b6, and I spent a bit of time in the morning looking at this, and I was now hoping that my opponent would play an idea of Ivanchuk's, which is quite popular. a4, very bizarre looking move, but let me just explain this in a bit more detail. Now queen to b6 looks very odd, but the idea is to, rather than let white have the attack, is to counter attack. And I want to play e5 next, and then bring my bishop out to c5. So for example, if white plays, I don't know, a bad move, let's say bishop to e2, this is a useless move, doesn't do anything. Now my plan is to go e5, and after pawn takes e5, bishop to c5. And we can see I have double power on this diagonal now. This is already probably very good for black here. So this is the idea of my queen b6 move, to counterattack with the move e5. Now in this position there was a game of Antrik Jabava which went a4, and the point of this move is to kick the queen away, but a4 I believe is actually quite a big mistake now, because you can play e5, and after, well, white really has to take this pawn, so after pawn takes e5, now we don't go bishop to c5, because if we do, then white can play a5 himself, or herself should I say, and okay, we have one check here, but the king just comes to e2, and now the queen has to move off this strong diagonal, and you will probably lose your bishop, so this is not a very good plan. But it was found by the player Marcus Rageh from Austria, strongest Austrian player, that in this position a very sensible and good move for black here is simply pawn to a5, stopping white's idea, and on the next move black will bring the bishop to c5 with a brilliant attack. For example, let's say white takes another pawn, now bishop to c5, and this is incredibly dangerous for white. I mean, one of the pitfalls here, the knight is actually on pre. Let's say white tries to move this to e2. Oh, this would be a gruesome move, a terrible move. This is like, you know, you're trying to run away from an attacker and you get stuck in a dead end. No, I don't want your antivirus free. Maybe I do, but not now. And here black could go bishop f2 check, and happy days, bishop to queen to e3 checkmate. And well, I like Heather, so I don't want to make her cry, you know, by winning like this. I mean, she's too good to defeat in this way anyway. Heather's a very good and dangerous player. There was one case last time I played her, she actually beat me with the white pieces. The game was played in Hastings on New Year's Day, so I think both of us were struggling in that game somewhat, and it was a crazy game, but she played brilliantly in that game, so I have a lot of respect for her chess here. So this is the idea behind queen b6, but my opponent Heather now played the best move, knight to c3, developing a piece, simple development, why not? And to be honest, in my preparation I saw this move and I wasn't very happy about it, but I thought, well, okay, I mean, I'm going to try play it in the hope that Heather plays a4 anyway, but she played the best move, knight to c3. And now I played e6, a very solid setup, aiming for a kind of French defence position. Now, there is another interesting move here. I could continue with my idea of pawn to e5, but I didn't like some variations here. God, my memory is awful nowadays, but I'm just trying to think what I didn't like. I think it was, well, e5's not a move here. The main move that people play actually is pawn takes e4 and now pawn to e5. So sorry, this is the main variation, but now I didn't like the move knight to f3, and I thought I was dragging behind development. Even though this is theory, I didn't like it. So I decided to pick a more solid move and wait for the action to occur later on in the game. So let me just find where I am. I played e6, and now my opponent Heather played a very interesting idea. When I was preparing this in the morning, I only looked at some games with a3, and this move now allows the white bishop to move, because white wants to go bishop e3 here, but now I'd probably grab this pawn on this square. Now a3 is quite a crafty little idea, because after a3, let's say I play, I don't know, move like knight d7, now bishop to e3. And if I grab this pawn, well, this would be a horrible move to play. Can you see a strong move for white here? Knight to a4. And in actual fact, my queen is trapped because a3 stops my queen retreating to b4. So that would again be, that's a New Year's Day game for you. That's the kind of game you play after celebrating until the wee hours of the morning. So that was what I was expecting. My opponent played a very intriguing idea, b3. And at the time when my opponent played this, Heather, I thought, well, this just has got to be bad because you're weakening all the dark squares. But Heather's simple idea is to fianchetto the bishop, move the queen, castle queenside with a lot of action. And there's no real way I can take advantage of this. So Heather's played very interesting and exciting opening here. So, okay, let's move on now. Bishop b4, bishop b2. And now, well, I'd like to play the move e5, but I didn't like the look of this because of pawn takes e5. And if b4, which Is this right? No, because now a3 doesn't work. So let me just get the... Okay, after e5, sorry. Rather than taking on e5, I was more concerned. This game was played a while back, so I'm trying to recall my memory. Not as strong as it used to be. I was more worried about a3 here straight away. And if I take on d4, Heather takes on b4. And the kind of position I want to avoid is something like this. Because look at this bishop. Now it's released against my king side. Previously, white had a pawn on d4, but I didn't want to allow this. And a queen check on e3 is nothing because of knight to e2. And the bishop is such a strong piece. So it seems to be an error in that, positionally speaking, to ever allow white to get rid of the pawn on d4, because then the bishop on b2 comes alive. This is my logical thinking in the game. I wanted to keep the pawn on d4 so the bishop on b2 looked bad. So I developed knight to f6. My opponents Heather continued with their plan, queen d3. We both castled, and now I went a5. So we get a typical opposite side race here. To be honest, I wasn't so happy with my position, and I was really worried about a certain plan here from Heather, because I thought, well, my attack is very slow here. And the move I was worried about was the move knight to h3 now. Can you see white's idea? It's quite brutal. When you're attacking an opposite side, speed is important. I was concerned about the plan of simply knight to g5 and e5, when the queen is excellently placed to checkmate me. For example, let's say I played a move like knight to d7. Well, now knight to g5, and all of a sudden this is very dangerous, because h6 could well be met by even h4 in this kind of position, where I don't really want to open up the h file. Something along these lines. It just looks scary to me. Or even e5 in some positions was another possibility in this type of structure, when it seemed like Heather was getting the first attacking first. So I wasn't too happy about knight to h3, but my opponent decided to go h4 anyway, Heather should I say. So I thought, well, I don't mind giving up a pawn if I open up the a file, so I went a4. Knight takes a4, and now, well, I like my rook on the a file, so I'm not going to sacrifice that. Queen to c7. Well, the idea of going Bertie 5. Bertie, Bertie, Bertie 5. Get Barry or Bertie. Do I like Barry or Bertie? What do we like? Boris? After Boris Johnson? Not sure about that. Boris Johnson is the mayor of London. Well, I like Boris. He's got great hair. Anyway, here, a3 played. And now, again, in these types of positions, as soon as you start retreating and losing time, you're going to be behind in the attack. And I think a great tip is, in these double-edged positions, opposite side castling, speed, tempo is so important, even if you have to lose time. I'm not so worried about my pawn down. It's more important I attack. So b5. No retreating. I get my attacking first. Now e5. And here a very clever move. Knight to h5. Because this knight now has potential to come into these two squares. Now, had my knight gone to d7, then it looks at some point like Heather's plan of going knight to g5 is incredibly strong. And by playing the move knight to h5, I actually hold up the pawns. But my knight on h5 is also in danger of being trapped. So the rest of the game really revolves around whether white can defend my attack and win my knight on h5, or I can checkmate Heather. So this is kind of what the position is about. Heather jumped in, knight to c5. I took on a3, and now I have this useful a file to attack along. But my opponent Heather can still try to escape with her king in a lot of lines. Knight to e2. So Heather is trying to stop my knight coming into any squares. And now Heather's idea is to play g4. So trapping my knight. Now, I didn't actually like the move queen to a5 here. I thought, well, this move is possible with the idea of just going for a mating attack. But now, what would I do after queen to c3? I mean, queen to a5, the obvious move. But queen to c3 looked very clever. I don't want to swap queens off, because then my knight is going to be in a lot of trouble. I'm going for a mating attack. If I go b4, then Heather can probably just move her queen back somewhere, like queen to e3. And now, what Heather has done very cleverly has blocked up this file for my queen. In analysis, Heather showed that she was going to play this as well. And the king is actually sitting very safely on d2, so I can't block my queen's diagonal like this. And when you're attacking, obviously, if you can't see a way forwards in the brutal manner like Queen A5, then you need to bring more bits into the game. So let's bring the horsey around. Did I just call it horsey? Don't call them horsies. They are called steeds. They are called knights of doom. Okay, so I want to give a knight in here. So Heather now takes this piece off and plays a very good move here, queen to c3. And again, this stops my idea. There's no need to rush into playing g4 here. This is a mistake here, because now my idea of having my bishop here is also to eliminate the knight on e2, so my knight can come in. And here I can do that by playing e4. And I take the knight next move. My knight comes in. I have a great position with c5 to come. But the critical position is now reached after queen to c3, and this is the critical position of the whole game. Now, one way to improve when you're playing chess: play the obvious moves quickly, and when the position gets to a critical stage, so when you either feel you're in danger or you feel like it's time to crack your opponent's position, that is when you suck up a lot of time, and that is when you spend your time thinking. Now here it is a critical position because I am now threatened with the move g4, and if I lose a piece without any counterplay, I'm going to lose the game. And it's really a race situation. Queen to c3, clever move, because again it stops the queen coming in and the king can come to d2. So this is a very critical moment of the game. This is a very nice idea. And again, if a move like b4, well, I think here I can play this, but I wasn't so happy now because I'm giving up a pawn. And even though I can get my knight back in the game, I've lost a pawn. And when the king comes to d2, I wasn't so happy about these positions. So I think my next move is one of the better moves, actually, I played in the whole of the British Championships. And this is the kind of position I like playing, aggressive, tactical position. And here I came up with an interesting idea. I was also worried about after b4 of some ideas of queen c5. This is another option when I didn't like this because my queen can't come in and the queen on c5 is very well placed. And now I came up with the idea of playing c5, and this is a very good move here. And the point in this position is, well, now I'm threatening b4 when my opponent Heather can't take on b4, so I can keep my pawns rolling up the board. And I obviously had to calculate what happens. Again, what I was doing when I saw this idea, I saw some concepts involved, and then I had to use the process of calculation. So I calculated one line at a time. And I actually started with the move g4, which we're going to come to on the game, and I calculated that that was good for me. So then before I played the move c5, I didn't bother looking at g4 anymore. That's out of my calculation. So I go back to the position before I play c5, and I imagine after c5 what other moves my opponent has. And the next move I thought was d takes c5. So here I thought this was a critical move, but the idea of me pushing c5 was to gain pressure against this, and now I can play the move b4. And this was my idea, and I'd calculated that after queen takes b4, I can go rook a1 check, king d2, take on d1, king takes d1, and now we see a key point with my c5 move. I can go queen takes e5, and my c5 move, very typical in the French defense, this break, very typical in the Caro Kann as well, is to demolish my opponent's center. And here, all of a sudden, I have great play, because my knight now has potential to jump in, especially after bishop takes e2, and I have very active pieces. The one move I had to spot is I don't want to swap queens, but queen d3, d4 is never possible because I win the queen. And in my calculations, I was even wondering after this knight d4 move, I saw I had knight g3. This was a tactical point, which I thought was good for me, but I was also getting very intrigued by the move bishop c4 when I was analysing this as deeply as I could. But in general, I came to the conclusion that this is a good position for me. So again, the process of elimination, when you're trying to work out these critical positions, and these game-changing positions. This is what good players can do. They can work out when it is time to have critical think and to calculate as deeply as you can. So the only other thing I really had to concern myself with was a move like queen takes c5, but now I can just go queen to a5, and there's a big difference here. I'm threatening to get a massive attack with rook here. I have an open c line, so it's even better I don't have a c pawn. And if now something like queen to c3, we are going to see that, well, I have a number of options, but here the situation is a lot different. It's a lot better for me not having a pawn on c6, because after rook c8, I have big pressure here. So this c5 move, I think, was the game-changing move, and this was the key move of the whole game to find. If I hadn't played this, I could drift into a bad position and lose very quickly. So c5, and now let's see what happens with g4. Of course, I had to calculate this one as well. And okay, Heather is winning my knight, but my attack comes in the nick of time. So now I play b4, and no longer can Heather take this pawn. And if something, well, queen to b2 looks horrible because the queen is so stupid on this square. It's going to be trapped maybe after c5, or queen a5. This is a really bad square. And if queen here, well, now I thought I have a couple of good options here. For example, bishop takes e2 and knight g3. I don't lose a piece. And even a move like c4 can be very dangerous here. And if pawn takes h5, we now take away the d2 square for the king by playing this move c3, and checkmate is coming up. Nothing that white can do to stop a checkmate on a1. So pretty much Heather is now forced to play queen takes c5, and I think any ending is going to be good for Heather. So I now had a little combination: queen to b7, and now Heather picks up a piece, but rook to c8, bringing my rook into play. Queen to d6, and here the move I had to see in advance, the move rook to a2, and this point on c2 is pretty much impossible for white to defend. How does white defend this one? Very hard, and if I can get another rook into the attack, it's going to be game over. So rook d2 pretty much forced in order to defend this, and now I had an idea in mind, a simple idea: bishop takes e2. The problem for Heather now is if the bishop takes e2, well, there are a couple of good moves here, but simply rook to a1 check and rook takes h1 is good enough, being exchanged up with an attack. So white is now forced to play rook takes e2, and maybe I missed an easier win somewhere around here. I mean, maybe even in this position I could have played queen to a7, but the thing is, with the idea of bringing my queen eventually in, but the thing is, I saw one way to win, and I was getting a little bit short of time because of my big thinks earlier on, and I thought if you see one good way, you don't need to overcomplicate things. And after rook takes e2, we now have a very peculiar win. Nothing against the king, surprisingly enough, but instead, can you see the move that I played? Pause the video if you need to. Let's see if you can find my move in this position. Rook to a6, and surprisingly the queen is now trapped on d6, so I'm going to win the queen and get a winning position. After now, I think again the last chance I ever had was rook g1. I was calculating this at the time with the point when I go rook takes d6 and something like queen here, Heather can try rook to g2, and this is a little bit tricky for me. If g6, Heather takes and goes h5. And I thought this was the best chance, but I didn't believe it because the white king is in more danger. I have moves like even, well, I mean, I can take on d6 is probably safe, and here I can even block the attack with a move like f6, and eventually I'm going to get my pieces in. But this was definitely white's best chance. I'm a little bit quicker, I hope. This is still winning, but definitely I was trying to calculate these lines at the time, but instead my opponent did not play that, but instead took on a6. Now it's very easy. I just take back, and after rook g2, queen a1 check, and this way I'm picking up everything and winning the game very easily. So probably one of my better games from the British this year. A very interesting game. The key point was that c5 move, And I think that shows you when you're attacking, time is of the essence. Just keep throwing things at your opponent. And also you have to note when a critical moment in the game chess arises. When it does arise, take your time, spend a bit more time on the position, calculate deeper than you have done before, and then hopefully you'll find some truth and the way to continue. Anyway, one of my better games. Nice to have a win for a change. But okay, Caro Kann, maybe it's the opening for me even. We saw actually my draw, that was it, against Jones in the Caro Kann, the other Caro Kann we saw, where I also got a very interesting position. So it's actually, you can get some very interesting positions with the Caro Kann, I realised. But I mean, whether I'll play it again, I'm not sure. There's too much to learn maybe, and I'm too lazy. Cheers anyway, until next time.